Erev Tov, everybody. Welcome to our Thursday night Parashat Shavua class. Tonight we are studying Parashat Devarim. We're beginning the fifth and final sefer of Chamisha Chumshei Torah, and of course it is Shabbat Hazon. Those two terms, Devarim and Hazon, will be the main crux of our discussion tonight. And as we know, this upcoming Shabbat is called Shabbat Hazon. The Shabbat of Hazon, and this name is derived from the fact that the Haftarah that is designated for this Shabbat is taken from the words of Yeshayahu, first chapter, first pasuk, which begins with Hazon Yeshayahu ben Amoz, Asher Chazal Yehuda vel Yerushalayim. The vision of Yeshayahu, the son of Amoz, which he saw concerning Yehuda and Yerushalayim. This parasha and Haftarah, Devarim and Hazon are always read without exception on the Shabbat prior to Tisha BeAv, or on the Shabbat of Tisha BeAv, when Tisha BeAv falls out on Shabbat and the fast is postponed to Sunday. That sometimes happens as well. It's a well-known fact that this Shabbat Torah readings in general conform to an annual cycle. It's arranged with precision, and there's profound meaning that was given by Ezra HaSofer, that was brought down in Masechet Megillah, why each week is read, each parasha is read in a certain week. And it's worthwhile, therefore, to maybe expound on this a little bit as to why Ezra HaSofer saw it fit that Parashat Devarim is always read on the Shabbat prior to Tisha BeAv, or again, like I said, when Tisha BeAv falls on Shabbat and it's pushed off to Sunday. Addressing this issue, we have to look at the Arba Turim, and as well as the Shulchan Aruch. Both write Tisha BeAv Kodem Va'etchanan, that the fast of Tisha BeAv is prior to Parashat Va'etchanan, right? The Shabbat before Parashat Va'etchanan, which we call Shabbat Nahamu. And what's the reason for this? They explain, Kedei sheyikreu Parashat Devarim shemitchilat betochechotav shel Moshe Kodem Tisha BeAv. In order that Moshe Rabbeinu's rebuke of the people, which takes a large portion of the book of Devarim, and it begins in Parashat Devarim, is read prior to Tisha BeAv, to go hand in hand lehaftir ba bechazon, to go hand in hand with the Haftarah of Hazon, shehi tochachat al churban, which is the rebuke of the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash. So the rebuke of Moshe Rabbeinu at the end of his life, found in Parashat Devarim, goes hand in hand with the rebuke of Yeshayahu, found in Parashat Hazon, which in Haftarat Hazon, which deals with the destruction of Bet HaMikdash. So in other words, we want to connect these two rebukes: Moshe's rebuke of Bnei Israel before his death, and Yeshayahu's rebuke of Bnei Israel concerning the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash. And since we read Yeshayahu's rebuke on Shabbat before Tisha BeAv, it was arranged that Parashat Devarim coincides with the reading of this Haftarah. Let's go a little bit deeper. There's a chidush by the Bnei Yisachar, which we've quoted before in this series of shiurim, and he writes that there are 22 days of Ben HaMetzarim, 22 days spanning from Shiva Asar B'Tammuz and Tisha BeAv. And in those 22 days, there are precisely 528 hours, right? 22 days times 24 hours, and you will get to 5 times 24 hours per day. It's 528 hours. Why is this number significant? This is precisely the amount of chapters, perakim, contained in all the Mishnayot found in Torah SheBeal Peh. If you were to count all the chapters of Mishnayot from Masechet Brachot all the way to Masechet Nida, you will find 528 chapters. The Megillah Mukot writes that the sum total of all the 6 orders of Mishnah, the chapters of the 6 orders of Mishnah, Shisha Sidi Mishnah, equals 528, which is the gematria of Mafteach. Mafteach means a key. And because the Mishnayot that were redacted by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi are the key to interpreting and understanding the entire Torah, of course, included the Torah SheBeAv, the 5 books of Moshe, which we'll get to soon. He goes on to explain that the connection between 528 and 22 days of Ben HaMetzarim and Mafteach he says, can be linked to a certain midrash that writes, En kol hagluyot halalu mitkansot ela bischut mishnayot. All the exiles that the Jewish people will go through, their ingathering of those exiles comes as a result of the merit of the learning of Mishnayot. Why? My tama ki gam yitnu bagoyim ata kabetzem. Quoting a pasuk that says, although they pay tribute, the word pay tribute is yitenu, to the goyim, I will gather them now. Now the Chachamim and the Gemara say that this word yitenu, which in Hebrew means will give, the Gemara actually says in this pasuk, it should be interpreted as an Aramaic word. Aramaic word yitenu, and there's a general rule that a taf and a shin interchange between Aramaic and Hebrew. Just to give you an example, in Hebrew, the word for a bull or an ox is shor, and in Aramaic, it's tor with a taf. We say in Chad Gadya, right? When the bull came, the ox came, it was a Torah. That's how we say in the Chad Gadya and Pesach. So yitenu is actually leshanot, the shin and the taf. So the term yitenu is actually related to the term mishnah. So we see here, as a result of the mishnayot that the Jewish people learned, the Torah SheBeal Peh, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gathers the exiles. And we find the same interpretation in the Gemara Masechet Ba'abatra. If Bnei Israel all study the mishnayot while in exile among the goyim, I will gather them now. So in the merit of the study of mishnayot, we will merit the galut. We will merit exiting the galut, the geulah, which is represented by the 528 hours in between the Ben HaMetzarim, which is between Shiva Asar Betamuz and Tisha BeAv, entering the future geulah. The Bnei Yisachar goes further. He says, you see, the Torah SheBeal Peh is synonymous with the holy Shekhinah. By occupying ourselves with the Torah SheBeal Peh, we merit the presence of the Shekhinah. The Gemara Masechet Brachot teaches us that even if one single individual on his own studies the Torah, the Shekhinah is with him. And therefore, the Shekhinah is constantly with us in Galut. The Gemara Masechet Megillah says, Tanya Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, Bo re kama chavivin Yisrael lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Look how beloved the Jewish people are to God. Bekol makom shegalu Shekhinah imahem. In every place that they were exiled to, the Shekhinah is with them. Lis Mitzrayim, Bavel, ve'af keshehen atidin ligael Shekhinah imahem. And even in the future, when they will be redeemed, the Shekhinah will accompany them. So this explains very nicely why Bnei Israel will only be redeemed in the merit of their study of Torah SheBeal Peh. Because when the Jews occupy themselves with the Torah SheBeal Peh, which is the holy Shekhinah, like we said, it causes God to want to take Bnei Israel out of Galut along with the Shekhinah due to the pleasure that it gives him. So therefore, for this reason, the 22 days of Ben HaMetzarim contain 528 hours, the same number of chapters in all the Mishnayot, which indicates that the merit of studying the Mishnayot, the foundation of the Torah SheBeal Peh, will merit the redemption from Galut. There's a Gemara in Masechet Nedarim, which, if we study it, it can maybe substantiate the premise of what we just said. The Gemara says, the Gemara wonders why was the Bet HaMikdash destroyed? And the Chachamim explain, because they have forsaken my Torah, which I put before them. That's what the Chachamim explain. Al ozvam et torati asher natati lifnehem. So, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amarav. Rabbi Yehuda Amarav says, what does this mean? How do you forget the Torah? So Rabbi Yehuda Amarav explains, Shelo barechu batorah techila. Very famous statement by Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav. He says, they neglected to recite a beracha before engaging in Torah study. As we know that we say Birkat Torah every morning during Birkot HaShachar, they neglected to recite that beracha. Now the commentaries are very puzzled with this statement. Like, how is it conceivable that the Jewish people were exiled from their land, Eretz Israel, for such a seemingly minor Sin, a transgression, yes, I understand, but it's small. There's so many harsh rebukes by our prophets over the course of time that the Jewish people did wrong, and this is what you're choosing. In fact, the Gemara says very explicitly that the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed because of the 3 cardinal sins: Avodah Zarah, idolatry; Gilui Arayot, adultery; and Shefichut Damim, murder. So how then are we to understand this statement by Rav that Bnei Israel were sent into exile because of failure to recite the bracha before engaging in Torah study? So the Turei Zahav, the Taz, explains that the Chachamim were very aware that Bnei Israel were exiled due to serious transgressions. They're not, removing that idea from us. But what they could not comprehend was why their Torah study didn't protect them from committing these sins. The Gemara says, Torah ba'ina de'asikba megana u'matzla, that when a person is engaged in Torah studies, he's protected from sinning. There's no yetzer hara. So why is it that the Torah couldn't protect him from shefichut damim, avodah zarah, and gilui arayot? So it must be that they forgot the Torah and abandoned its ways. Has to be. Therefore, it no longer afforded them the protection that they need. So this is what puzzled the Chachamim. Al ma'av da'aretz. Why did we get exiled from the land? Why was the Torah study not sustained? This failure that resulted in being exiled. Addressing this question comes Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda says the name of Rav, Shelo barechu b'Torah techila, because they neglected to recite a bracha before engaging the Torah in the Torah study. Only Torah study with commitment and self-sacrifice is sustained. We learned this from the pasuk in Parashat Chukat. Zot Torah Adam ki amut ba'oel. What is Torah? How do you sustain Torah? Adam ki amut ba'oel. He dies in a tent. He's got to kill himself for it. It takes a lot of work, and that's why the girsa of the bracha, according to our brothers Ashkenazim, is Vetzivanu la'asok bedivrei Torah. That's what they say, la'asok bedivrei Torah, to engage in the study of Torah. We Sfaradim, we say al divrei Torah, which is an all-encompassing term. But the Ashkenazim say la'asok. There has to be engaging. There has to be work. It doesn't say lilmod divrei Torah, just to learn. Right? Because la'asok emphasizes that it requires labor, it requires exertion, effort, in-depth analysis, discussion. So therefore, what Rav is saying is that they did not bless b'Torah betchila la'asok b'divrei Torah with the proper intent. Rather, what were they doing? They were committing to learn without the exertion, without the intensity. They wanted to learn what appealed to them, what was easy, without the extra effort. And as a consequence, that Torah did not offer them the protection that they needed. And that's what the Taz writes as the reason why they were exiled from the land. So what do we see from these words of the Taz? The root cause of the Galut was their failure to study the Torah with proper intent and commitment, pilpul, and therefore, la'asok b'divrei Torah was not attained or maintained, should I say. The Midrash writes, Shekol mi she'ohev osher v'ta'anug eno yachol lilmod Torah SheBeal Peh. Anyone who covets wealth and covets earthly pleasures in this world cannot study Torah SheBeal Peh. They cannot study the oral law. Why? Lefi sheyesh batzar gadol v'nidut shena. Because when you need to acquire wealth and you need to acquire earthly pleasures, it consumes your day. It consumes your mind. It involves great suffering, lack of sleep. You won't be able to focus on the Torah SheBeal Peh. So therefore, it can't work. So this is what we're saying over here. The bracha la'asok b'divrei Torah wasn't maintained by Bnei Israel because they were too busy with other things. And they couldn't focus on the Torah with energy and effort. Rabbeinu Yonah says that the bracha of la'asok b'divrei Torah, or al divrei Torah for us Sfaradim, refers to the Torah SheBeal Peh. And the second bracha that we recite in the morning, which is Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim, relates to the Torah shebichtav, to the written Torah. That's why when a person gets an aliyah to the Torah shebichtav, He doesn't say Asher Kiddushon la'asok b'divrei Torah or al divrei Torah. He says Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, because that is in reference to the Torah shebichtav. The question is that why is this so? Because it would seem that Torah shebichtav comes first. Why institute a blessing? Let me rephrase the question. If we should say Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim first, because that is the bracha corresponding to the Torah shebichtav, and then only afterwards we should say la'asok b'divrei Torah or al divrei Torah, which is Torah SheBeal Peh, right? Torah shebichtav comes before Torah SheBeal Peh. Why reverse the order? So what we're saying is very deep. We're saying based on Gemara Masechet Gitin, lo karat hakadosh baruch hu berit im Yisrael ela bishvil devarim shebe'al peh. That God only entered His holy covenant with the Jewish people on account of what? On account of the oral teachings of the Torah SheBeal Peh. So due to its importance, that bracha is recited first. La'asok b'divrei Torah. Al divrei Torah is recited before Asher bachar banu mikol amim. It's for that reason why all the galuyot will be gathered solely because of the study of the Mishnayot, which is the basis of the Torah SheBeal Peh, because it constitutes a tikkun, a rectification for the failure of the Torah study of Torah SheBeal Peh, the study with labor, study with exertion, and the reason why the land was lost. And that goes hand in hand with what we said at the beginning by the Bnei Yisachar, 520 hours in the 22 days of Ben HaMetzarim, corresponding to the 528 chapters of Mishnayot, to teach us in the merit of the study of Torah SheBeal Peh, we will be redeemed and exit the Galut. Now, this is all nice, but there's a significant problem with this entire theory. The problem is that in reality, there aren't 528 chapters in Mishnayot. There are only 523 chapters in the Mishnayot. 528 hours in the 22 days, but only 523 chapters of Mishnayot. In fact, the Rambam, in his introduction to the commentary of Mishnayot, he writes very clearly, the number of Masechtot in the Mishnah are 61, and within it, there are 523 chapters. So now, what exactly did the Bnei Yisachar mean then when he said 528 chapters? We know it is impossible to comprehend Mishnah. I take that back. It is impossible to comprehend any of the Chumash, the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, without learning the Mishnah and the Gemara, which we call Torah SheBeal Peh. The pasuk in Kiryat Shema, which we recite every single day, multiple times. The pasuk says, "V'dibarta bam, v'shiftecha bebetecha u'lechtecha baderech," and you shall speak of them while you sit in your home and you walk on your way. And Rashi, who quotes the Gemara in Masechet Yoma, says, "Bam yesh lecha reshut ledaber, ve'lo bidvarim acherim." On those words, you have permission to speak, but not of other things. Rashi interprets the word bam as the words of Torah. And in fact, there's an allusion to this, that the word bam alludes to the Torah SheBeal Peh and the Torah shebichtav. Because the Torah shebichtav begins with the letter bet, Bereshit bara Elohim, and the Torah SheBeal Peh, the oral Torah, the first Mishnah, begins with the word me'ematai, which starts with the letter mem. Bet and mem is bam. V'dibarta bam. Those words, the words of Torah shebichtav and Torah SheBeal Peh, that's what you should study. But anything else, any words, senseless words, or unrelated to the two Torahs, should be disregarded and not spoken. Now, we can justify maybe what this tradition of what we said, that there are 528 chapters in Mishnayot. In truth, there's only 523. But nevertheless, since the Torah SheBeal Peh, the oral Torah, explains the Torah shebichtav, explains the written Torah, and the Torah shebichtav is comprised of 5 books, Chamisha Chumshei Torah. Therefore, 523 plus 5 add up to 528. Both of them together represent the mafteach, the key to all aspects of Torah. There's a pasuk in Sefer Yeshayahu that says, again in reference to the days of sorrow and the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash. The pasuk writes, Ki ma'asu et Torat Hashem tzevaot, for they have loathed the Torah of Hashem, Master of Legions. Ve'et imrot kadosh Yisrael ni'atzu, and they scorned the word of the Holy One of Israel. The Midrash says, the first part of this pasuk, Ki ma'asu et Torat Hashem tzevaot, they loathe the Torah of Hashem, is in reference to the Torah SheBeAv. And the second part of the pasuk, which is more harsh, more cruel, and they've scorned the word of the Holy One of Israel, is in reference to the Torah SheBeAl Peh. Why is the pasuk referring to the Torah SheBeAl Peh, or scorning the Torah SheBeAl Peh, in such a more difficult, harder term? And the answer is because by disparaging and dishonoring the scholars of the Torah SheBeAl Peh, the scholars of the Mishnayot and the Gemarot, by failing to study their teachings properly and diligently, they're demonstrating their hatred for the Torah SheBeAl Peh, and it's also demonstrating a disregard for the Torah SheBeAv. So that's what it says. For they have loathed the Torah of Hashem is in reference to Torah SheBeAv. How do we know that they loathe the Torah SheBeAv? Because they scorned the words of the Chachamim, the Torah SheBeAl Peh. They scorned the teachings of the sages of the Torah SheBeAl Peh, the Mishnah and the Gemara. So now it appears that what are we saying right now? That the major damage caused by Bnei Israel scorning the words of the oral Torah, the words of the Chachamim, relate to 523 hours of the Ben HaMetzarim. The first 523 hours of Ben HaMetzarim. I want you, for those listening right now, I want you to stay with me right now, because we're going to have an amazing chidush right here. The first 523 hours, which we said correspond to the 523 Mishnayot, chapters of Mishnayot. And those are the chapters that the Jewish people scorned. They correspond to the Torah SheBeAl Peh, and they correspond to what they deliberately hated or looked down upon the teachings of the rabbis. The last 5 hours of Ben HaMetzarim, which are, by the way, the last 5 hours of Tisha BeAv, because the conclusion of Tisha BeAv is also the conclusion of Ben HaMetzarim, correspond to the 5 books of Torah. So the first 523 hours is the Mishnayot, all the way up to the last 5 hours of Tisha BeAv, which correspond to the 5 books of Torah, Chamisha Chumshei Torah. Those were also damaged, those were also loathed, but they were damaged secondarily due to Bnei Israel's neglect of the Torah SheBeAl Peh. Remember, it's because of the Torah SheBeAl Peh neglect that damaged the Torah SheBeAv. Look at the chidush brought down by our Chachamim. There is a well-established Jewish minhag on Tisha BeAv to rise, meaning not sit on the floor, after midday, after Chatzot. After Chatzot on Tisha BeAv, no longer are you sitting in the floor. No longer are we sitting on the ground. It's now on benches or chairs. The Arizal explains the rationale for this minhag. And he says, quoting the Midrash, that Mashiach ben David was born on Tisha BeAv. And the Arizal asserts that not only was he born, that was born on Tisha BeAv, but he was born after midday. And therefore, once Melech HaMashiach, who will redeem Israel from Galut, has been born, it's customary to rise from the ground and minimize our mourning. No longer are we sitting on the ground, we're sitting on chairs. Based on what we said, unbelievable. Consider the 523 hours that precede the last 5 hours of Tisha BeAv, which we said the last 5 hours is Chamisha Chumshei Torah. It turns out that the hour immediately after midday on Tisha BeAv corresponds to the last chapter of the 523 chapters of Mishnayot. There are actually 6 hours after midday. 5 of them are reserved for Chamisha Chumshei Torah. So the 1 hour right after midday, there's 1 hour there. That hour corresponds to the last chapter of the Mishnah, right? The last of the 523. What does that chapter conclude with? The following Mishnah. I read it for you. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta. Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta said, Lo matza kadosh baruch hu keli machazik veracha leIsrael ela hashalom. That God did not find a vessel better suited to preserving bracha for the Jewish people rather than shalom. Shneimar, Adonai oz le'amo yiten, Adonai yivarech et amo b'shalom. Hashem will give his nation strength. Hashem will bless his nation with shalom. Now, we know the second Beit HaMikdash was destroyed due to the sin of sinat chinam, baseless hatred. We know that. We also know that the fact that it was destroyed because of baseless hatred, and the first temple was destroyed because of the 3 cardinal sins, the Gemara equates it to, must be, if 3 cardinal sins was bad enough to destroy the first temple, it must be that baseless hatred, sinat chinam, is equivalent to the 3 cardinal sins. So now, look at what we've come up with. We can understand and comprehend this minhag to get off the ground on Tisha BeAv, specifically during the hour after midday, because that hour corresponds to the last chapter of the Mishnah. And that last chapter of Mishnah, which we just learned together, is that God did not find a vessel better suited to preserving bracha rather than the shalom. Seeing as the second Beit HaMikdash was destroyed because of sinat chinam, it's obvious that the only way the Geulah is going to come is as a result of shalom, as a result of peace among everyone. So therefore, during the hour corresponding to that statement about the extraordinary merit of shalom, peace, we get up off the ground and sit on proper chairs and benches. And explains very nicely why Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, chose to conclude the Mishnayot with this statement. Because Rabbeinu HaKadosh was a direct descendant of who? David HaMelech. He always taught his merits. Gemara Masechet Shabbat says that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who came from David, taught the merits of David. So he concluded the last Mishnah and all the Mishnayot during the exact hour that Mashiach ben David will be born. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will not find a vessel better suited to preserving bracha rather than shalom. Now, with all this, Rabotai, we can explain why Ezra HaSofer chose to begin the reading of Sefer Devarim, Parashat Devarim, on the Shabbat preceding Tisha BeAv. Let us discuss, what is Sefer Devarim about? Is it more like Torah SheBeAv, or is it more like Torah SheBeal Peh? So you're probably thinking, what are you talking about, Rabbi? Clearly it's Torah SheBeAv. It's part of the 5 books of the Torah. It's Torah SheBeAv. It's not a Mishnah. It's not a Gemara. Well, let's see. If you look closely, maybe not. We see that it's included with the other 4 books. And if one letter or word is missing from any of the parashiot in Sefer Devarim, that Sefer Torah is invalid and you have to fix it. So in that respect, Sefer Devarim is an integral part of Torah SheBeAv. But yet, in many of the writings of the Chachamim, the Rav Tzadok HaKohen, and the Sfat Emet, he says that the Sefer Devarim is often considered a part of Torah SheBeal Peh, of the oral Torah. And they substantiate this based on the fact that Sefer Devarim has a special pseudonym to it. It's called Mishneh Torah, a repetition of Torah. The Gemara teaches us, Masechet Megillah, that Moshe mipi atzmo amaran. Moshe uttered the words of Sefer Devarim, Ele Devarim, on his own. According to Rashi, this means he was acting as God's messenger. He was relaying to the people what God had said to him. So what the Vilna Gaon says, you want to know what the true difference is between Sefer Devarim and the other 4 books? The first 4 books were heard from the mouth of HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself through the throat of Moshe. That's how the Vilna Gaon interprets it. But that's not the case of Sefer Devarim. Yisrael heard what was written in Sefer Devarim like any prophet spoke. So it was more personal in a way. It was Moshe Rabbeinu speaking, just like a prophet, just like Yoshua and Shoftim and Shmuel. It was Moshe in Sefer Devarim. So that's how Sefer Devarim was transmitted to the Jewish people through the mouth of Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom. So it appears that Sefer Devarim, in fact, possesses an intermediate status between Torah SheBeAv and Torah SheBeal Peh, because it incorporates the characteristics of both. On one hand, it was uttered by Moshe Rabbeinu through Ruach HaKodesh, and it's included in Torah SheBeAv. Okay, but on the other hand, it was not heard directly from the mouth of God, but through the throat of Moshe, like the other 4 books. So it resembles the Torah SheBeal Peh. So now with that, we can learn unbelievable. Applying this principle, the Sfat Emet says why Chachamim refer to Sefer Devarim as Mishneh Torah, because it indicates Mishneh Shnaim. It's like 2 types of Torah. Mishneh also means repetition. But there's like 2 types of Torah. There's a Torah SheBeAv in it, and there's a Torah SheBeal Peh in it. Whereas the other 4 books are merely Torah SheBeAv. So now that we've learned the root cause of the Chorban, and the subsequent Galut was because of Bnei Israel's failure to occupy themselves properly with the Torah SheBeAv and Torah SheBeal Peh, the Chachamim said, we got to do something about it. Ezra Sofer looked at the pasuk and he says, look at these Jewish people, there's a problem here. They're loathing the Torah SheBeAv, they're scorning the Torah SheBeal Peh. So Ezra Sofer instituted that the reading of Sefer Devarim begin when? On the Shabbat prior to Tisha BeAv, because it incorporates both aspects of the entire Torah. It incorporates aspects of the Torah SheBeAv, the fact that it's part of the 5 books, and also of Torah SheBeal Peh. And this practice teaches us the tikkun required to realize the complete final Geulah is proper study of the Torah SheBeAv and Torah SheBeal Peh. 523 plus 5 equals 528. That is the mafteach. That is what we need to focus on so much in these last 3 weeks. We're not done yet. We still have a very important week in front of us of Shavua Shel Halbo, concluding with Tisha BeAv. And let's not forget, those last 6 hours of Tisha BeAv are so important. The hours where we get up and we recite Nechama and we sit on our chairs, the hour that represents the birth of Mashiach ben David, the hour where everything gets rectified, which puts everything together. The last Mishnah, the last chapter of Mishnayot, where Kadosh Baruch Hu is declaring to us there is no greater tikkun in the world. There is no way to bring back the Bet HaMikdash, to what we long for so much, rather than to have a kli that can be machzik the bracha, a vessel that can hold and attain all the blessing in the world, and that is shalom. That is what we strive for at these very, very precious times. That was what we need to work at in our everyday dealings with our friends and our family and our relatives, seeking peace, because that's what counts. That's what's going to bring the key and open up a whole different world for us, and hopefully a world filled with bracha when the coming of Mashiach. And wishing everyone here a Shabbat Shalom and a very, very easy and meaningful fast. Have a great night.